Hello everyone, so this is introduction to lesson planning. I will go through the different sections of the lesson plan, so I suggest you have a copy open in front of you so you can see what I'm referring to when I talk through the lesson plan. So let's start with the front page. There's quite a lot of information that you need to include on your front page. So first of all, obviously your name, the date of your lesson, the level of your lesson. So are you teaching elementary, pre-intermediate, intermediate? You write the level there. The length of the lesson. So is it a 30-minute lesson, a 45-minute lesson? TP number is your teaching practice number. So for your first lesson, you write there TP1, and then second lesson is TP2, and continue like that. And then you circle the main focus of your lesson. If you're not sure what the main focus of your lesson is, please check with your tutor, because there are several implications of this. The focus will determine which lesson framework you use, and the aims of your lesson, and so it's essential that you know the exact focus. Often the course book will have a heading that will say reading or listening, but sometimes it will say something like language focus, which might be a grammar or a vocabulary lesson. So just make sure you check with your tutor to know what the main lesson focus is. So now I'll go through each of these sections one by one. Let's start with lesson aims. So for your lessons, you'll have a main aim, and then you'll have a subsidiary aim. And the main aim should reflect the area that you circled, the lesson focus. So here are some examples of aims. So you're either going to have a skills lesson where you develop one of these 4 skills: listening, speaking, reading, or writing. Or you'll have a systems lesson where you'll teach vocabulary, grammar, or maybe functional language. So let's say your main lesson aim is listening. Your sub-aim will be a different area. So maybe you'll have listening as your main aim and vocabulary as your sub-aim. Or maybe you'll have grammar as your main aim and a review of some vocabulary from a previous lesson as your sub-aim. So your main aim and your sub-aim should be a different area, so you don't want to have listening for both of your main aim and your sub-aim. So these are very generic aims that I've listed here. So to give you some more specific aims, so for a grammar lesson, maybe your main aim will be, for example, to enable students to understand and use the structure used to plus infinitive in the context of childhood memories. So this lesson would include material something like, when I was younger, I used to visit my grandmother after school, and I used to spend time at my family home by the beach. I don't know, language like that. And for a vocabulary lesson, you might want to do something like this: to enable students to understand and use the following vocabulary related to sport, and then list a few items. Or maybe develop students' vocabulary in the context of food and drinks. And for a skills lesson, here are some different skills. The first one would be for a speaking lesson, second one for reading, then listening, then writing. So I suggest you pause the video and just take a minute to read the skills lessons, these examples of possible aims. Next section is personal aims. So this is areas that you want to develop. So obviously for your first lesson, you don't really have any idea of what areas you need to develop. So you could just write generic things like, I want to get to know my students and get comfortable in front of the class, or maybe I want to feel more confident with using technology in the classroom. So think of a couple of things that maybe you've seen in the demo lessons that you would like to do as a teacher. But from your second lesson, you will get some feedback from your tutor. So here's an example of tutor feedback. So we'll give you feedback on your planning, what went well with your planning, the good points, and then something to think about. And then we'll give you some feedback on your teaching. So for your personal aims from TP2, include feedback from your tutor. So in this case, your personal aims would be to use more pair work, to try and model the language more naturally, and to try and incorporate more effective drilling. The next section is assumptions. So this is what knowledge your lesson is based on. So you need to think about what your students already know that will help them in your lesson. So maybe it's a lesson about past simple. And your lesson is comparing maybe the use of past simple and other past forms. So you'll make an assumption that they've already learned past simple, because how can you compare past simple to other past forms if the students haven't been taught past simple before? So one thing I recommend you do is look at the previous pages in the course book. What comes before your lesson, and how are these lessons preparing the students for what you are teaching? It's not a good idea to assume that the students already know the language in your lesson, that they already know. So let's say your lesson is past simple. I wouldn't assume that they already know everything about past simple, because then what's the point of your lesson? If the students already know it, then why are you teaching it? So make sure that you're making reasonable assumptions about the students' knowledge without assuming that they already know everything in your lesson. The next area is materials. So you need to include a full reference for the materials that you include, and also make sure that you actually write this reference on all photocopied pages. The next section is context. So context is the topic. It's not the language area that you're focusing on. So context wouldn't be grammar, for example. It wouldn't be vocab. It wouldn't be pronunciation. It will be the topic. So something like family, or living abroad, or making friends, or I don't know, getting a job. So it's the topic of your lesson. The next section is anticipated problems and solutions. So here you're talking about the learners, the materials, and classroom management. You're not talking about problems with the language in this section. So examples would be something like, I might have a problem with the CD player. So what is the solution? Maybe you'll read the tape script at the back of the student's book. Or maybe another problem would be that some students arrive late. So what are you going to do in that situation? You need to plan some solutions for potential problems. The next area is the language analysis. So you don't have to include this for your first teaching practice, but I'll just quickly talk you through it now, give you a brief overview. So here we analyze the language that is in our lesson. So target language, this will be for grammar, vocab, or functions lessons. And you include information about the meaning, the form, the pronunciation, and any potential problems and solutions that students might have with this language. We will be doing another session with you later on this week in which we'll go through this in a lot more detail. So don't worry if you don't know what to write in here for the moment. And the same applies to incidental language. We'll be talking through this a bit later on in the week. So for your first lesson, you don't need to include any information here. And this is where you think about how you are going to present your lesson. So the stages, the aim of each stage, so why are you doing that thing? The interaction is, so how is the class going to interact? Is it going to be open class, where the teacher talks to the whole class? Or is it going to be pair work? Is it going to be students working on their own, or maybe in groups? Then you've got your procedure, where you write down exactly what happens in your class. So for example, I'll give the instructions, then the students do the task, then they'll check in pairs, then they'll get feedback on the board. So you write down quite a detailed step-by-step approach to what will happen in the lesson. Then you've got the materials section. So here you give the page number and the exercise number, and then the time for that stage. So the level of detail that you need is for another teacher to be able to take your plan and teach from it without asking you what to do at that stage. And so here's an example of one of these that's been filled in. So you can see the stages listed there. Then we've got aims, the interaction. So we just use a code. So SS would be student to student, so that's pair work. TS would be open class, so the teacher addressing the whole class. S would be a student working on their own. And you can see there with my times, I've given a sort of range, so 5 to 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, rather than breaking it down into 1 minute, 2 minutes segments. So keep a range to make it a bit easier for yourself. Okay, so finally, there's a quiz for you to do based on this video, and good luck with your lesson planning.